Hey guys, Scott here, and welcome to another episode of Idea Review. The last one was like 17 years ago, but it's fine. This is episode 3 now. Today we're going to look at killer ideas from the community. A week ago, I made a video asking people to submit their ideas here. I got a couple of ones on Twitter. I'll try to remember those as well. But I'm going to go over as many as I can and go over how realistic it would be, how good it would be, if it would work, if we would ever actually see it to begin with, and just kind of go from there. Thought it'd be an interesting idea for a video. So without further ado, let's start. First up, instead of a new killer, I think we should buff Trapper by removing this. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, years ago I came up with the killer idea called the Gladiator that could use a big shield to charge at survivors and knock them around. If the survivor hit a wall or something, they would lose the health state at I was about to say, that's just Wesker. They stole your idea, man. That sucks. All right, next one. Instantly thought of Gluttony from Full Metal Alchemist. I've never actually watched that show. I'm just going to assume it's a fat thing of some kind. His power would be to eat pellets with an activatable button once the pallet is down. Also with a slightly faster break like Blight, Cannibal, Demo, Nemesis. Okay. When he eats a pallet, it gives him a stack of his main power. So this is going to be a power that's limited because you will eventually run out of pallets, which means you will not be able to charge your power anymore. His main power is a settable trap as big as Freddy's snare. Trap looks like a void with teeth, looks similar to a mouth. If a survivor activates the trap will bite and injure the survivor. Okay. But if the survivor's already injured, then it's a different story. If the survivor is injured and goes over the trap, hands will come out of the trap and swallow the survivor. It's a cool visual effect. They're not dead. It will act as if they got hooked, but inside the gluttonous void, a lot like Pyramid Head's cage. Okay, so you basically get to save time on a hook by walking to a hook because it just instantly teleports you there. Not unheard of or anything. A portal that the other survivors can see at any range will spawn, and they can go into the portal and unhook them from within the gluttony. Gluttony can't enter the void because the void is within his stomach and makes sense if you watch the show. That's interesting. When they unhook an animation will play, which spawns them back into the map. If the survivor falls into the void with two hook states, the survivor will instantly die. Oh, okay. I mean, basically, if they're on death deck, they're just gonna die immediately anyway. Of course. You can stack up to 3 traps if he eats 3 pallets, but there's a cooldown of 10 seconds per use. If all of them are already placed, you can place another in return for the first trap disappearing. Okay, kind of like Freddy's. If a survivor gets hit and the trap doesn't return to gluttony, he has to eat another pallet. So it's 1 charge per 1 pallet. It seems like 3 traps if he eats 3 pallets. So 1 charge per pallet. So this sort of just is like, it's sort of like a trapper that's stronger with his traps, but also is limited by the resources of the map. So if you get a map like Larry's or something like that, you might have a scenario where you're not really kicking many pallets because it's mostly windows. And again, if you're on a map like the game, you will have all the pallets in the world. So I think powers that are inherently reliant on map RNG, I'm not a huge fan of. I know a lot of powers are like that, and that's okay, but I'm not a huge fan of them personally. Secondly, I don't think trapping killers are really interesting at all. I think trapping killers are the most boring killers in the entire game. There's a reason why everyone finds Freddy boring, Trapper, Hag. It's because the gameplay against them, at the very least, is pretty much non-existent. Because if they trap an area, they force you to run away from it, which means your only option is to just run in a straight line away from a different loop as soon as they trap it. Additionally, it allows you to do things like basement trap setups where if you got 3 of these giga traps, imagine putting someone in the basement and you have 3 of these super traps that can instantly hook other people as well. If they're already injured, maybe you can hit them and then they're forced to run through it again. Like, I mean, I can foresee a lot of extremely not fun scenarios for a lot of people if you had something like this. I think the idea itself is actually really interesting from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a gameplay standpoint, I feel like that would just be really unpleasant. Next, I've always wanted a killer capable of some form of flight. Ooh, it's a risky prospect with DBD. It would be a vampire. The vampire possesses the ability to shapeshift into a flying creature of the night. Hold the power button to begin transforming. While doing so, press the attack button to complete the transformation and begin flying forward, speeding up the longer you remain in flight. You can fly for 10 seconds before returning to normal. Best comparison you can make in how moving in this state would function is that it would be like using pinheads possessed chains, but with slightly more control over your steering. Okay, that's pretty, that's extremely fast. You can go to the bounds of the map. Flight in DBD is an extremely dicey prospect alone, but let's keep reading. Crashing into an object in the state or releasing the power won't cause you to return to normal and fall to the ground. After returning to normal, Wings of the Night has a 20-second cooldown. So, see, this is the kind of power, it is really dependent on how long the animation to start and how long the animation to stop is. Because if you're getting loop and you can just fly above the loop and then just land on top of somebody, you have the most broken killer in the game. So you obviously can't do that. You have to have some type of cooldown and some type of startup time. And when that happens, you get a scenario where the survivor is probably just going to run to a different loop while you're setting up. And then when you're beginning to land, you'll have to land through an animation and then they might be at a pallet again. I think at the very least, this would be pretty interesting, like, to play as and play against. I'm just not really sure balance-wise how flight would work in this game. It's, I think, too drastic an idea. As much as I love, like, really unique ideas like that, I think it's too drastic an idea to actually work in Dead by Daylight. I think it would cause so many potential issues, landing on top of so many things you're not supposed to. They'd have to account for collision in so many new venues. I think, like, in terms of plausibility of adding this to the game, it's like a 0% chance. They would never, ever do it. As a secondary power, though. Standing over a dying survivor, press the active ability button to feed upon them. Gaining a stack of blood hunger. A survivor can only be fed on once each time as they enter the dying state. For each stack of blood hunger you possess, you gain a 2-second reduction to the cooldown of Wings of the Night, a 5% increase in movement speed while flying, and a 3% increased action speed. You can possess 5 stacks of blood hunger at a time. Every 60 seconds, you lose a stack. Feeding on a survivor resets this time. I'm okay with an idea like that. I think an idea of being able to, like, feed on a down survivor. I know VHS, like, has that that kind of thing. I think that's an interesting idea, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I just think the power itself would be extremely problematic, but I do like the idea of feeding on a survivor to give yourself, like, temporary buffs and stuff like that. I think that's pretty neat. The Gremlins, it's 2 victors controlled by 2 players. When you get kicked, you spawn in a random locker. To hook people, the 2 victors have to stack up on top of each other and carry the... God damn it. Next up, we have what I think is a pirate archetype, which I would love to see, because there's not really the pirate archetype in the entire game, so... Power. Dead Man's Lantern. Betrayed by your own crew and all that you have to guide you are the shoddy lanterns that were lit for every plunder you and your wretched crew took part in. I like the lore of this already. You can place up to 3 sea lanterns on the ground in any part of the map, so long as it's accessible to survivor and killer. The killer can pick up and place the lanterns at will. The survivors may extinguish the lantern, taking 10 seconds, reduced by 20% for every survivor. Let me process what that means. Okay. So it's basically like you can set up totems, pretty much. Each sea lantern has a 24-meter radius. If the survivor is within 24 meters of a lantern, they will be given the Oblivious status effect. If they're within 8 meters of the lantern, their aura is revealed to the killer. So basically, you get, like, your power is like Giga Undying plus Retribution. If the survivor stays within the radius of the lantern for 30 seconds, they will receive the Headache status effect. Ooh, new status effects. That's risky. A headache distorts the survivor's vision, similar to the way the clown's bottle work. No. You definitely do not want to do this. People absolutely hate clowns' visual effects. There is no way that will be received well. I have to do an instant veto on that. As interesting as it is, people would hate that. People would absolutely hate that. I would do something different. I think, like, I'm okay with, like, more and more punishment for staying in the area of one of these lanterns. I think that's fine, but distorting your vision is not the way to go. Chase power, blunderbuss. With each betrayal, you grew more fond of the weapon, using it to shoot down even the toughest captains. Now its power is fueled by others' suffering. For each headache that the survivors have, let's just pretend this is something else for now. For each debuff that the survivors have, you gain 1 token. You may pull out your blunderbuss, consuming it, and fire it. Each shot consumes 1 token. To shoot, and you must charge for 3 seconds before unleashing a blast of gunpowder. Fires a blast of gunpowder covering 10 meters in front of the killer. So I'm assuming it's going to be like a doctor shock. Any survivor that's hit by initial blast is injured. Any survivor that steps inside the blast is given the headache status effect. Gunpowder will linger in the air for 10 seconds. Oh, and, like, continue to cause the effect, I'm guessing. So how is that going to work? If it shoots out, I'm assuming it's going to be like kind of like a cone or like a doctor straight line effect. If it's like that, is this going to go over pallets? Will this go over windows? Because if not, it's pretty bad, because they just go behind a wall and you're just not going to hit anybody. But if it does, it's got a 3-second wind up. Now, are you slowed down while you're holding this power and charging it? If not, it's kind of broken. I mean, there's a lot of little nuances you have to think about that. I mean, those are things that can be, you know, kind of tweaked and stuff like that. I do think the core idea, though, of having, like, it's not really like a trapping killer. It's like an area denial killer. The one problem I have with that is potential 3-gen abuse. and I think you can really force survivors into 3-gen scenarios. And that's not typically a good thing if it's really easy to do so. Typically, I think a killer should have to earn a 3-gen, but if this basically forces it because you can just constantly have your power in these areas that you choose, I think that could have an issue. But I like the idea of a continually stacking and more severe debuff the longer you stay near something that the killer places. That's cool. It would just need a lot of tweaking, and that visual effect definitely would not work. My idea is more of a joke killer, the Carpenter. He can destroy all breakable objects slower, but gathers wood by doing so. Also, he can destroy undropped pallets. He can re-barricade breakable walls with the wood resource, but also barricade some windows and doorways. There's Fortnite. Next, the Werebeast. I'm guessing this is like the werewolf archetype, which we don't have, so. The Hunt. You can sprint towards the source of any loud noise notification that can be followed up with a pounce, straight forward like a shorter demo shred. So already I have a question about that. What is the range of movement there? I like the idea that you hear a noise and it's a bestial like reaction that you can beeline towards it. But what is the angle of attack? Like, if it's right in front of me, can I only go in a 1 degree straight line because then I run the walls and it's useless? Or is there like a cone that you can kind of maneuver in and maintain the speed burst? If it's the latter, I think that's an interesting idea and that can work. Prowl, control to lower yourself on all fours and become undetectable, so kind of like Pig. Here you can do similar Pounce, which is like he said, a shorter demo shred. You can also smell out carcasses while in the stance. Carcasses are scattered around the trial. The Werebeast can devour carcasses to build up Frenzy. At max Frenzy for the rest of the trial, get increased lunge, can sprint anywhere, anytime, and survivors are inflicted with paranoia, and paranoia causes survivors to sporadically hear an increasing, decreasing terror radius regardless of where you are. So now I'm a bit more concerned of the speed of this sprint that happens when you hear a loud noise notification. I get this is something that you would have to build up as the match goes on, but how quickly would you be able to get this, and how fast is this sprint? Because if you start giving someone, it's basically like, if you give Myers like infinite tier 3 by default, if you give them a powerful ability and they can just have it for the rest of the match, you need to really be careful with the balancing of it. But this is something that you didn't really specify, so there are ways to tweak it to make it okay. And I still am okay with killers getting stronger as the match goes on. That's inherently how DBD works to begin with, so that's fine. I just think you need to be really careful with that. Survivors can carry and drop carcasses and place them in lockers. So carcasses, are they like human bodies or are they just like animals? Morried survivors behave like carcasses. Oh, well, there you go. Work on gens carefully and tread lightly, but don't make any noise that can make him running to your position. It may be inevitable with certain perks. Yeah, I was thinking about that. So you could have something like Discordance, for example, and have inherent amazing synergy with the ability, which I have no problem with. I think perks having synergy with the killer's power is totally fine, especially if you have perks that release with the killer that are kind of related to that. So I think that's inherently a cool idea as well. Add-ons, you got your typical broken, mangled, hemorrhage stuff. So this seems like you're combining a couple of things. You're combining the stealth aspect of Pig, you're combining the demo shred range, and then you have a third separate mechanic that can make you, I guess, like kind of stronger than a demo, which is interesting. I'm just trying to think about like how unique gameplay wise it would be. Like, what separates going against this killer from going against Demogorgon, other than he can get to you. Well, it's not that he can get to you faster, because Demo can technically teleport. There's a side objective for survivors, which is interesting. It gives them something else to do. When I'm talking about the actual loop-to-loop gameplay, what is it going to be like? Is this just going to be like going against Demo? What makes him more unique than Demo in that regard? I'm trying to think how that would be different. Man, you can assign perks too. When a survivor is separated from others after some time, the survivor is in isolation, affecting them with paranoia. And that's the increasing and decreasing terror radius. Starting a chase with the survivor resets and pauses their isolation. Otherwise, after being isolated for too long, the survivor is also exposed with a loud noise notification shows up in their current area. See, that is an incredibly strong perk. Because the worst thing for a killer is when the survivors all spread out on separate gens across the map. A perk that inherently counters that, or at least gives you a leg up on that, would be insanely strong and damn near meta, if not one of the most meta perks that there is, because that is the worst thing that can happen to survivors splitting up. So a perk to give you information when that's happening and to make it stronger in the killer's favor, I kind of like that. I think that's a really interesting idea because it's very hard to deal with survivors that split up very efficiently, and this would give you a leg up on that. So I think that's actually pretty interesting. Survivors who enter your Terrarius give you a hidden stack, one from each survivor. While in a chase, your stacks are revealed to you. Your attacks cooldowns are decreased based on the number of stacks you have and consumes all stacks. Okay, that's like an interesting variable, say the best for last. I kind of like that. That's cool. Hex Insufferable Fatigue. A hex that drains all of the vitality even after the slightest bit of exertion. Survivors who become exhausted while this hex is up are permanently exhausted until the hex is cleansed. Passively, this perk increases the timer of all exhaustion debuffs regardless if the hex is up. Permanent exhaustion, but it's tied to a hex, and it only happens once they become exhausted. I think that's balanced, honestly. I think that's pretty balanced. Because you still would get one use out of your exhaustion, but then you would see it's not going down anymore. So you'd still get to use your perk once, but then you would have to find it. So it's an extremely powerful perk denying effect. However, it's tied to a totem, which can just be broken as well. I like that. I think that's pretty balanced, honestly. Next, how about a killer that's based around weapon switching? And a couple ideas for Jason like that. Across the trial, multiple objects would be switched out for weapon spawns at points of interest like loops or main buildings. These weapons have a set amount of durability. Once you've expended a weapon of durability, it would break and be tossed away. The main weapons would be a spear, axe, fire iron, and ice pick. Interesting, like a weapons master. Spear would have increased range but lack of a lunge to hit over objects. That's interesting. For people that loop tight around short loops and try to like stab them over, that's pretty interesting. Axe would break through pallets and walls at a fast rate and have an increased lunge. Cool idea. Fire iron would apply deep wound or some kind of on fire effect. Ice pick would involve insta-down but slower movement, possibly with reduced tear radius. Ooh, that's interesting. Powerful weapons like the ice pick would only have 2 or so spawns, and a weapon like the axe would end up with 3 or 4. Once you expend all the weapons on the map, you'd be able to go into a rage mode, which would have you move faster and move through breakable objects. Interesting. Add-ons would influence the number of weapon spawns on the map as numbers their durability as well. I kind of like that idea. I kind of like the idea of kind of like traversing around the map, and depending on which weapons are nearby, your playstyle changes every time you're looping, and you're trying to counter survivors looping. I think that's a really cool idea. That requires a lot of dynamic play and on-the-fly decision-making from the survivor and the killer. The survivors go identify, oh, he's got a spear. I can't loop this tight anymore. I need to be a bit further away now. Or, you know, he's got the ice pick, so it's instant down. I got to play super safe, but he's moving slower, so I can be a bit greedier with my loops. I think killers like that require a lot of back and forth between survivors are really interesting. Very simple idea. You didn't go too much into it, but I like that because it means it can be molded into basically any archetype. And I think that's really cool. I like that a lot. Very cool idea. The most overlooked gameplay aspect of DB for me has always been the use of the survivor's camera to track the killer, looking behind and all that stuff, and I have an idea about the killer whose power is tied to this aspect. My idea is a killer who gradually applies a debuff of sorts onto the survivors the longer they look at it. Similar in effect to Doctor's madness as it goes up in tiers. So there's not much to the suggestion, but what's there I love, because it's the whole concept of like what they said in Eldritch Monster, where the more you look at it, the more like insane you go. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a doctor level insanity gameplay mechanic or anything like that. There's a bunch of things you can do. But I do love that idea of a killer that you look at, the more you look at, especially like in a chase, the more, very nasty debuffs or like crazy shit would start happening. So basically you would have to make the decision in chase to constantly look at him for perfect tracking and perfect looping, or not look at him for a while to regain some of your sanity or whatever that mechanic would be in exchange for less optimal looping because you can't exactly track where he is. So I think that's an interesting idea, and it would vary depending on what the actual debuffs would be and things like that, but I like the idea of an Eldritch monster of that kind. Next, I'd love to see an illusionist who can create clones of himself that help mind game survivors in loops, kind of like Mirage from Apex. Oh, I played Apex. I played Apex when it first came out. Mirage was, the illusionary guy. I played Pathfinder back when his hitboxes were broken. It was very sad. A neat secondary power gimmick could be turning into survivors as well, but he primarily focused on making clones that go in certain directions, controlling them, maybe swapping positions with them. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. God, there was a character in... This character in Dota that does that. I don't remember. I haven't played Dota in over a decade. But yeah, they would like send a vision of themselves somewhere, and then you could teleport to that vision or not. And I think automatically running visions like that, they just run in a straight line or something. That's a really cool idea. Because like you're at a TL wall, you're at a jungle gym, and now the killer goes behind the wall and he shoots off a version of him going that way. So the survivor sees him going that way and starts looping the other way, but the actual killer is this way and he can get a hit. And so it's going to come down to the survivor to basically understand when the killer is going to try to trick them like that. And there would have to be some type of tell. Otherwise, you just put survivors in 50-50s all the time, and that's not exactly skillful or anything. It's just sort of based on luck. So you'd have some type of tell for a very attentive survivor, but it should be subtle too, so it still has a power. I think that idea could be really good. And one of the problems is that would really only kind of work in straight loops, which are most of them, like jungle gyms, TL wall, shack, and things like that. But as soon as you have like a small rock loop, you wouldn't really be able to do it because A, they can probably just see you over it, and B, if you're, a mirage is just going to go in a straight line or something like that, it's not going to do anything either. Additionally, making a stationary mirage is not really going to do anything. What are you going to like pretend you're face camping? It doesn't really do much. It's got to be like a mobile ability to make survivors second guess where they're going. But I think you can make that work, and I think the idea of it is totally fine. I'm just curious how that would actually work in game when you're playing around the loops themselves. Well, that's going to be it for these first episode. I have like 170,000 more of these to go. If I didn't get to yours, I'm going to be doing many more of these because, like I said, I'm not even close. I got emails, I got Twitter messages. I have a lot to go through, but I think this has been pretty interesting. There's a lot of really cool ideas. So hopefully you guys enjoyed people's suggestions, and hopefully look forward to some more of this. Thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy. Have a good one.